Hey Eagle fans, it's EaglefanKarl. This is going to be my reaction video to the big win the Eagles had Sunday night against the Cowboys. And at this point, I think we can say that the division race is over. You take a look at those standings. It doesn't take very much math to figure out that with 6 games left to go, the best the Cowboys can do is 11-5. So the Eagles only need to win 2 more to match that. And if those 2 are the Giants game and one of the other conference games, we'd have the tie break. So in that event, we've got basically this division wrapped up because it's going to be very hard for any team in the division to catch us. And we hold a lot of the tie breaks against them anyway. So at this point, I think we can start making our plans for the playoffs and really start looking instead of how the Eagles stack up against the division, because I think it's clear that we're head and shoulders above the rest of the division. I think it's time we start taking a look at how good this team is compared to the rest of the conference. But that's a topic for another day. Let's talk a little bit about the game. Another thing that I think is over, and of course I'm obviously biased on this, so I thought this before, but I think last night really cemented it. All that debate about who's better, Wentz or Prescott, I think we can retire those questions. At this point, I think in a year or two, people are going to look back at this discussion and they're going to kind of chuckle and say, I can't believe we actually legitimately questioned who was the better quarterback of the 2 of them. Not to say Prescott isn't a good quarterback, not to say that he isn't going to have some success with the Cowboys, but I think last night really showed that Carson Wentz is just head and shoulders above Dak Prescott. Some of the stats that really sort of bear this out. Dak Prescott obviously had a rough night last night. He had 3 interceptions in the game last night. Carson Wentz has 5 interceptions on the whole season. So right there you can see that one of the main things about quarterbacks, especially young quarterbacks, is not turning the ball over. And Dak Prescott had the 3 interceptions. He also had the fumble to go on top of that. So that's 4 turnovers that Dak Prescott had last night. Now, I will say that neither quarterback had the greatest game last night if you look at the stat sheet, but it's clear that Carson Wentz had a better game when you look at the touchdowns versus interceptions for both guys. But think about it this way. If you're looking at it purely from a statistical standpoint, which obviously you can't do with the sort of scenario I'm going to paint out for you, because I think this is taking it to an extreme, but if you look at just from a statistical standpoint, Dak Prescott was actually the 3rd best quarterback on the field last night. And that's because Cooper Rush, his backup, came onto the field, threw 1 incomplete pass, and had a better passer rating than Dak Prescott did. So right there you can see that already, when you've got a quarterback rating or a passer rating that is lower than what you would have after 1 incompletion, I think that says a lot about how poorly you played it or how poor of a game that you had. As for Wentz, he continues to keep rolling on, and like I said, his stat sheet wasn't anything really eye-popping, but the main thing he did is he didn't turn the ball over, and he put the ball in the end zone when they had the opportunity to, which was really important last night, given the fact that we didn't have our field goal kicker. And spoiler alert, since Wentz isn't going to be one of my studs or duds, I do want to talk a little bit more about the game he had. This is now 6 straight games that Carson Wentz has had a game where he's thrown 2 or more touchdown passes in that game. That's 1 off the franchise record, which is held by Donovan McNabb, who did it in 2006. So, right there, you're already starting to get into rare company when you talk about franchise records and what any quarterback has ever done, not just a young second-year quarterback. We're talking about any quarterback on league history. So 2006, you're talking about Donovan McNabb in his prime. That's when he had a season where he had 7 games in a row where he had 2 or more touchdown passes. So Wentz is getting ready. If he has 2 against the Bears next week, he will match that franchise record. And of course, in terms of how many games straight has he had a touchdown pass, that's now up to 12. So we're getting even closer and closer to, where we're talking about franchise records for that. If you missed the video I did before on, how good a season Carson Wentz is having, I pointed out that if he goes the rest of the season and has at least 1 touchdown pass in each game, he will match Randall Cunningham's record of 18 straight games with a touchdown pass. So let's take a step back and take a look at the game again. And really, the one concerning thing about this game was the way it started, obviously. The first half was really poor. Especially from the offensive standpoint, I should say. It was really poor from the offensive standpoint. And this game reminded me a lot of the Redskins game on Monday night, and then the next week they played the 49ers. Both of those back-to-back games, and now 3 of the last 4 games, offense came out really flat and sluggish in the first half. The defense, though, played really well, kept the team in the game. And as they did in the 2 games before, last night they came out in the second half and dominated and put away an inferior opponent. What that really goes to show, though, is just how balanced this team is. The offense, when it's clicking, it is really good, but the defense is just as good, and the defense then can really pick the offense up if the offense is struggling a little bit to sort of keep games close until the offense gets things figured out. And I think that really it goes to really show just how good the defense is playing. But on the offense, they're also balanced even within the offense in terms of, we've got a quarterback who's an MVP candidate and we can beat you through the air, or last night, we can just run the ball down your throat. And it just goes to show that we can basically take a look at a team, figure out what's the weakness on that defense, and we can go after that rather than have to try and figure out if we've got a strength and it's also their strength, how we're going to get around that. We don't have to worry about that anymore. All we've got to do is take a look at what their weakness is and tailor our game plan, because we can do either run or pass. Let's go ahead, though, and take a look at some studs and duds. And of course, as we always do with wins, we start with the bad first. And the duds, it's going to be a real short list. I've only got three people, but two different situations that I'm going to put on this list. The second one is going to be on the opening kickoff, and I'm going to really call out Mac Hollins and Joe Walker on that. Both of them sort of took bad angles on the returner, and that allowed a huge hole to open up because Walker sort of went more in and Hollins went sort of more out, and it just left a big lane open that he was able to get through. And that could have been a real bad way to start a game, especially if you're playing an inferior opponent. You don't want to give them any hope early. And fortunately, the defense bailed them out and really sort of clamped down so that they weren't able to move the ball any further. But it really sort of could have become a big problem for the team because of the way that game started out. So for that reason, I'm going to put those two guys on the duds list for this week. The number one dud, though, for this week has got to be Zach Ertz, and that's really for two things. Number one, his productivity was way down. Now, some of that might have been the defensive scheming that the Cowboys were doing, trying to say, all right, we're going to take away one of your weapons, and Ertz has probably been our most reliable weapon all season. So if maybe they were game planning to take him away, if that's the case, then you can't kill him quite as much. But what you can kill him on is, I know it's at the end of the game, and at that point the game's in hand, but he fumbled the ball in a 2-point conversion when he was almost literally right there. So literally, he's fumbling the ball at probably about the half-yard line. And that's just something that if that would have happened and it wouldn't have been a 2-point conversion and you were trying to go in for a touchdown there, that would have been a devastating turnover. So it really didn't bite them the way it could have. But Ertz really has to do a better job there of protecting the ball and getting in the end zone. There's no reason why he shouldn't have been able to get in the end zone on that play. But with that, let's go ahead and take a look at our studs for the week. Some of the honorable mentions I have, since I'm sticking to my rule of only having 5 studs per game. Some of my honorable mentions, I talked about Wentz earlier in the game he had, so he would be one of my honorable mentions. Another one is Alshon Jeffrey, who I think had a really good game and came up with a touchdown pass that really sort of sealed that game and put it away. Also want to give some credit to two of specifically guys in the secondary I think that had really good games, Patrick Robinson and Ronald Darby, coming back off the injury, had a great first game back. So really credit to both of those guys. They would get honorable mentions. And the other honorable mention I really want to call out is because of a unique situation he was put in last night, and that was Camu Grugier-Hill. And he really ended up playing a real vital role last night. And I'm a little upset that Doug Peterson, when the game was in hand, didn't give him a shot to at least kick an extra point just to see if he could do it in case something like this happens in the future. But that said, he did a great job on those kickoffs. And, that could have been a real problem in the second half when we were scoring all those points. If we were then giving up short field opportunities because we didn't have a guy who was able to kick the ball off, it would have been a real problem. But he bombed those kicks down near the end zone or even into the end zone and even got a touchback. When that's happening and you've got a linebacker, a backup linebacker at that, doing that, it really goes to show, just sort of how this team is playing and how well balanced they're staying, and really just sort of the depth that they've really built into this team. So let's go ahead and take a look at the studs for the game, the 5 that I did pick. Number 5, I'm going to go ahead and put the head coach on there, Doug Peterson. He's not higher on this list because I was really sort of killing him in the first half for some of the things he did. I really thought the play calling was really poor in the first half, but he made up for that in spades in the second half. The second half, I think he called a brilliant game, really decided, hey, listen, without Sean Lee in there, this team is really susceptible to the running game, and he stuck with it in the second half, and it just was obvious that we were able to bulldoze that team over. So for that reason, you know, I really think that Doug Peterson deserves some credit for the in-game adjustments that were made, and really the whole coaching staff, but specifically Doug Peterson on the offensive side of the ball, because all of a sudden, boom, we came out in the second half, flipped the switch, and it was lights out for the Cowboys. My 4th stud is going to be Malcolm Jenkins. He had the tip on the first interception. He had an interception of his own later in the game. And then he also was involved in that kickoff, the very first kickoff, where Switzer broke it. Jake Elliott was the one that really made the initial tackle, but Malcolm Jenkins finished that off to make sure that he wasn't going to be able to get any further. So he really sort of was involved in that really game-saving play that could have just started things out disastrous for the team. So Malcolm Jenkins also on my studs list at number 4 this week. My 3rd stud, I was really sort of having a hard time as you're looking at all the running backs, because all the running backs played well yesterday. But there was one running back that I think really sort of, the play that they made sort of, I think was the turning point of that game. In the second half, we had taken the lead. It was 15-9. The Cowboys then pinned us deep. And if we end up having to punt back to them, they're right back in the game and they're able to go down and score and retake the lead. And that's when Jay Ajayi breaks off the big run for 71 yards. And I think that really ends up sort of setting the stage for the rest of the game. I think after that, we go ahead and go and score on that drive. And that sort of put a stamp on the game. And I think it was going to be really hard at that point for the Cowboys to come back. So that run alone, I think, was sort of the turning point of the game. And I think it made the Eagles realize, if they hadn't already, that they were going to be able to run the ball with a lot of consistency against that defense last night. And for that, Jay Ajayi and that big run is a big reason why. For the second stud, if the running game's going that well, you've got to give some love to the offensive line, and that is clear the way this team was playing, that the offensive line deserves a lot of the credit for how that game went. There's a lot of different guys you could give it to. Vaitai, I think, had a great game. Kelsey had a great game. But Lane Johnson, I think, had the biggest assignment last night, and he did really well with run blocking. The guy who led the league in sacks coming into the game, DeMarcus Lawrence, he completely shut him down. He was not a factor really in the game. I think he made one run stop that was a significant play for either a short gain or a loss. But for the most part, he was really not that much of a factor. And Lane Johnson had a great game taking care of him. So for that, Lane Johnson, you're my number 2 stud of the week. For my number 1 stud, I think you've got to look on the defensive side of the ball. With the way that game went, it really, I think, was won by the defense. You held a team like the Cowboys. You held them to 9 points, kept them completely out of the end zone. Held them 9 points in the first half and completely shut them out in the second half. Really allowed the team to stay in it when the offense was struggling early. And the defense really was a big reason for that. And the one guy on defense that really stood out to me, I know when you're going up against a guy who's a backup, people are going to say, oh, well, it's sort of hollow when you do that. But no, when you're going up against a backup, then you should be expected to dominate him. And that's what our rookie defensive end, Derek Barnett, did last night. He absolutely dominated Byron Bell, and really, I think, ended up becoming a real problem for Dak Prescott. Came up with a huge sack in the first half, and then also had the big forced fumble to sort of seal that game in the second half. He was a constant threat, was all over the place, and really, I think it goes to show what he can do as a player, and the fact of why we took him where we did in the first round this year. Only expecting more and more stuff to come from Derek Barnett. I think he's going to be a really stud player for us. And when you look at how good our defensive line is, he's the backup, and that's how good he played. That's not to take anything away from Vinny Curry. I think Vinny Curry played real well, but Derek Barnett really took his game to another level, really stood out in this game, and I think for that, you've got to give him a lot of credit, and for that reason, he's my number 1 stud of the week. Let me know what you think, though. Do you agree with my studs and duds? Was there other people that you put on that list? Or do you think that there's people that I put on there that didn't belong on there? Are there some duds that you think I missed? Or do you think we should give Zach Ertz a pass for his performance in this game? Leave your comments below. Of course, I'm going to go ahead and check in, give you my preview and prediction for before the Bears game next Sunday. Until then, happy Thanksgiving and fly, Eagles, fly.